Completed by Sir Charles Mueck in 1817, Belsay Hall was his tribute to ancient Greece. This is English Heritage's 6th major contemporary art exhibition at Belsay. It brings together challenging art with great historic beauty.
The exhibition is called Extraordinary Measures. It is about scale. The way that you feel very tiny as you're walking through the gardens and in the hall. So it's about seeing things in a very different way. I take the artist round, you see, I'm an invisible hand and I'm bringing these people together and I'm telling them a story. Mueck is showing 4 new works which have never been seen before. He's made work which is totally incongruous to the architecture of the house. So the strangeness of his work is accentuated by the oddness of this place. Slinkerchew was somebody that I was very interested in. The beautifully poetic little narratives are left on the streets of London to fend for themselves, and I persuaded him to come up and do something in a rural setting. Tessa farmer, whose work is extraordinary. They are exquisitely made and they are tiny little fairies, nasty little things that are actually mimicking what goes on in the natural world. We have Collishaw with his fantastic zoetrope. The first time I saw his work was in a gallery situation, and I just thought this is so magical and so fantastic that people will be astonished by it. Mariele Neudecker has made the most amazing piece for the Quarry Garden with this oversized replica of the Belsay window. This is a very ambitious project and for English heritage a difficult project, but amazingly ambitious and will dwarf us all as we walk through that middle pane. Freddie is one of the artists that I think has responded really well to the history of Belsay and the Greekness of this place, with the 2 robins telling the story of Theseus and Ariadne. Jenny Gillett is up at the castle with Pete Young, the model maker, and they are making a miniature model village which becomes a town, which may become a city. We'll learn about human settlement and how planning issues has a consequence. Kieran Traynor is the Belsay Fellowship artist, chosen from over 20 students from the University of Newcastle. And he put forward a really ambitious project, which when you look at it from a certain angle, you will see about 4 or 5 horses rearing up.
The crate is 1.3 tonnes. But about half the weight is the crate. So when he comes out, only 4 people quite easily lift it, and we're not going to damage him.
I will be happier tonight when this is done.
It's so magical when that box opens and you can see his hair, you know, his face sort of peering out.
He makes quite a dramatic entrance, doesn't he? And I think the changing scale and just his presence really makes people stop and think.
It's a really important show because it has 4 new pieces, which he's made over 2 years. People who've never seen them before feel that they can come to life or speak or move at any moment.
When the general public come and see the exhibition, nothing will quite prepare them for what it's like to inhabit the same space as these sculptures.
There's something strange about them because they have a great intensity, the sculpture behind me at this moment. Even though we might be alarmed by him, he seemed more alarmed by us and about to run away. So maybe he represents the private nature of the sculptor. All his sculptures are great for asking yourselves questions. You immediately think to yourself, who are these people? What is the relationship between them? What is the melancholy that seems to have crept in between this couple? Do I feel that melancholy in my life sometimes, just as do I feel fearful like wild man sometimes? All the emotions that are related to the sculptures are ones that we know very well in our own life, and sometimes we don't like to be very public about them. So they're very private feelings put into the form of a sculpture.
It's a guy tying a bee to the top of his 4x4 to take home with him, bringing back a souvenir or some kind of memento from his trip. It's a bit windy, yeah, he's kind of slightly come apart a bit and need to fiddle around with this to get it to work. In my head, I've always got a story for the picture, but I don't like to explain it too explicitly. What I found out early on was because the characters are so small, people sort of think, oh no, these poor little people, and they really empathise with the characters, and I thought that was quite interesting because they're just plastic models. So I guess I've wanted to exploit that a bit and see how much I can get people to feel sympathy for these characters or create stories around them.
How did the man catch the bees?
How did he catch the bees? I think he probably shot him. We went hunting. Wanted to make it the kind of idea that you'd have people coming from the city to the country for a day and perhaps not really treating an area in the way that you should. Sort of slight sadness in a way about places like this that you perhaps only visit once, or perhaps you might come here all the time with your husband or wife, and then one day they're not around anymore, and do you come back again and have those memories of times you had together and stuff like that? And feeling small is quite a universal thing. So I think, yeah, lots of people can understand the themes there. It's not complicated to understand. I like that it works on lots of different levels. It can be amusing pictures up to really resonating with people in terms of what might have gone through in life. I do a lot of the sadder ones, and that's probably my favourite ones to do. But then I kind of like to chuck in a few sort of people being stepped on and eaten by animals and things like that. It's nice seeing them actually in the environment when the undergrowth grows a little bit more in the next couple of months and starts to sort of come in front and behind the picture a little bit. I think they should hopefully feel like they sort of fit in the environment. It's been an interesting project because I could see a slant for it as a way to tell these little stories, which ended up being tourists invading the countryside.
It's all to do with the skeleton fairies, basically. I became really interested in skeletons and started making them out of twigs. And then they got smaller and smaller, and then I started making them out of the veins of leaves. So now I make them out of roots, and they're about 8 millimetres tall with insect wings. I'm telling their story and creating their world. Yeah, there's this common myth that the grey squirrels kill the red squirrels directly. The piece that I'll have in here is playing on that. The fairies and the grey squirrels are teaming up and preying on other animals. So there'll be various grey squirrels which have been armoured. So one of them's got spikes, one of them is wearing a scorpion on its head. This is actually the storage squirrel. The fairies have built sections of wasp's nest into its fur, and this is for taking the insects back to the den. So this is actually the first grey squirrel that I taxidermied myself, but it's actually a grey squirrel disguised as a red squirrel, so that it can sneak into populations of red squirrels, and the fairies who are hiding can jump out and ambush the red squirrels. I think there's a little bit of a backlash in this piece against the humans who are persecuting the grey squirrels in Northumberland. I prefer ideas to come through what I find. So that's how I learnt about insects. Insects led to bones, so actually learning taxidermy is just another process. This is the set for the animation. The idea is that the fairies have a den in one of these crevices. And inside the nest is a captive blue tit. The fairies are using the blue tit as an incubator because the fairies are collecting birds' eggs to feed to the squirrels.
It'll work.
Yeah,
I think it'll work.
That's nice, ending on the floor and then we can do the clothes.
Yeah, Tessa does the actual animating and the making of the sets, and I do all the tech stuff, but while we're actually making it, we bounce ideas off each other as we're making it.
And we realise that we have a plan of what we're going to do, but it's not set in stone. Some people who are probably going to be quite offended that I'm putting grey squirrels at Belsay because there aren't any They have red squirrels at Belsay, and if they see a grey squirrel, they shoot it. But I think it would be really interesting to see people's reactions.
The piece of work that I'm producing for Belsay tells the tale of Theseus and Ariadne, and it's Theseus going into the labyrinth. And when he went into the labyrinth, Ariadne gave him a ball of red thread so that he could go into the labyrinth and then follow it back out again. And this idea came off the back of the house being a complete obsession with Greece. The notion of doing something really, really tiny where someone had to get really close to it to see something small was really the only way for me to go with this. There was one thing I found in the shop. They had a set of reproduction playing cards, and it's directly related to this set of cards that I had when I was a child. And so the Robin characters that I've created are directly related to the Racy Helps figures. In my version of Miss Robin, her chest is being unravelled by Mr. Robin to get him through the labyrinth. The idea of creating a kind of scene has been based on my love of Victorian taxidermy. I tend to work with knitted textiles and I really enjoy that as a media, but I also like the way you can talk about things through this comfortable, cosy medium that if you used other harder mediums, it makes the subject matter too difficult to see or too difficult to discuss. I have really good control with thread and fibre. I know it really well, and I really like these kind of movements it makes. What I really, really want is for it to have this strong feeling of isolation and sadness. The space is much smaller than I remember it being. In my anxiety, it had grown and grown and grown, and it was massive. It's funny though being here and doing it, because when it's something you've been thinking about for a couple of years, and it becomes this big thing, and then you're actually doing it. I wanted to do something that wasn't intrusive, so it didn't detract from the quarry walk and the garden. And I really enjoy working in a really intimate way with the materials and objects, and I've really enjoyed just being here on my own, installing the piece in the rock face. It's that real shop window thing where you're not allowed in. It's doing what I wanted it to do, but really it's when other people interact with it, I'll know whether it really does evoke that very sad, melancholic feeling that I'm hoping it will.
A lot of my work is dealing with sort of miniature landscapes, but when I sort of walked around here I just felt like this needs maybe a bigger piece, and that I wanted to work with the other end of the scale. Well, I have done a couple of large projects before. It's kind of difficult to compare to this because I've never worked so vertically high like this window. You're competing with such a grand scale anyway. You know, it's all relative. Belsay Hall is actually quarried out of this quarry. In a way, it seemed a nice thing to just quote one of the features of the architecture from where the building was taken. What I wanted to achieve with this sort of doorway through it is that you'll have this sort of double effect of seeing what's behind you and seeing what's in front of you all the time. I think my work often tries to sort of deal with that kind of sense of time where the present that you move around in is constantly shifting. And a lot of the pieces sort of work with that in a three-dimensional way where you sort of walk around to backgrounds that represent the future and foregrounds that represent the past maybe, and then midground is the present if you like. So in a way that piece is just trying to do that by forcing people to walk through it. The position here is so incredibly kind of lush and green, and in the summer it'll be even more full of plants around the base and everywhere. So you'll constantly have this movement behind it and in front of it through the reflection. I would hope that people walk through it and want to redo it and maybe experience that a couple of times at least to sort of figure out themselves, because it's not a very familiar situation. I think it just makes you rejig your proportions and your sense of walking from A to B.
I have a particular interest and preoccupation in the way that members of the public and individuals can affect and influence their environment and their lives effectively. There used to be a village at Belsay in medieval or pre-medieval times. And that village was actually moved because Belsay Hall was built. We've got a model that we've worked on with Pete, which starts from a starting point of a few little houses, and throughout the course of this commission, we'll watch the whole city grow and develop.
It's influenced from what you see passing through the town, what shops look like. And so the original pattern is a block of wood with bits of styrene around it. So you cut them, stick it all together, you end up with your original. Then you take the mould of that, and then once you've got your mould, you can make as many of them as you want.
For everybody to have a house and a garden, there's a really, really big land take implication on that. I think these are all really, really salient issues for our time that we need to discuss. The intention is that we will have a screen, and on that, various interventionists will pose their questions, and when they pose a question, the viewers will be able to look at the model and decide what they think is the best option for the future development. What will be explained by the interventionists is what the implications of a decision in either direction is. Then they'll be able to take the token and they'll be able to put it in a perspex box. Whoever gets the most votes will be the winner, and that's the change that we'll then go ahead and make onto the model. What I'm hoping people will learn from this is about the way that everyday decisions that we make affect the changes in our environment.
I still am enjoying it. I like the buildings, I've got to say. They've been quite fun to work with. And they're just nice things to have knocking around in the workshop. They're sort of fun things you just sort of pick up and mess with. The more of them you got, the better, really.
There's a serious undertone, but the idea is that the development of the model is fun.
At the moment we're putting in the first phase of the wild horses exhibit. We're putting it in now, try and get it in before all the lovely bulbs come up, so we do as little damage as possible. Each of these frames will carry 4 pieces of wood curved into a kind of abstract form. At a certain point, when you walk around the sculpture, you will be able to discern a clear outline of a horse. It's basically like a trick of perspective. There's this building here that is the coach house, but there was never any horses in this building. I felt that these homeless horses represented the memories of a forgotten past that this lawn area seemed to evoke to me. One of the main issues of this site is the ground itself is protected. It has to be a completely freestanding piece of work, and the steel is simply there to hold up the timber.
Once the first one's in, we start bolting them together. There's no changing it really. You know what I mean? You've seen the weight of these, so we really want to get it right first time.
There's singular moments where at that point in time you will be able to see a horse that doesn't exist. The idea is you connect with a past and a present simultaneously in a physical space. This is 5 sheets of 24mm. It's very fine grain. It's got very strong twisting performances. If the wind picks up and the weather gets bad, they'll start giving a bit of movement to it. The fact that they've all just bolted in and just come together so straightforwardly is very reassuring. I'm very pleased. Putting it in early was probably the best thing we could have done. The grass is growing over it, the bulbs are growing around it. So come next week when it all opens, the pieces will look like they're just sort of floating. When it's this big, it's actually a lot easier to find the horses and see the images that are there.
In the work that I make, I like to have 2 different sides to it. So there's a side that brings you in and seduces you and is quite delightful in a way and entertaining. Then another side which represents kind of a crueler, darker side of humanity. I wanted to make a scene that kind of defied belief in a way, because at that point you can actually really engage somebody. The grounds just outside the castle, they are kind of oddly oversized, which dwarfs you a little bit and makes you feel like you've walked into some kind of weird mythical fairyland. So that partly informed the idea of having these little imp characters in there.
Today, I mean, it's the main objective is just to get things up there, really. There's one large piece, which is a canopy, which is a kind of welded aluminium flower or petal type shape, and that's the trickiest thing to get in.
They're all unique, yeah. And Matt designs the art, as it were. We just provide the mechanics for it. Yeah.
I'd start with like a little record deck with blue tack stuck around the outside, rotate that and hit it with a little party strobe that I got from the local shop. And then build it up from there. If you're going to divide a circle up into certain different parts, it makes sense to either do it 36 times or 180, which is what I did. So I've got 18 different characters. So 18 frames makes up 1 second of the animation.
Yeah, it's synchronising the turn of the table and therefore each frame of the figure with the strobe lighting.
Just based on a timer circuit, really. By the movement of the disc and the flashing of the light, it makes the figure seem to move.
Basically, it's working on the principle of the shutter in a cinema projector. You're seeing different frames of the same character, and the whole thing is an illusion, really. So you put your character into the computer, and the printer just builds up a 3D model in different layers. You can see that. Then as the thing starts to rotate and the strobe light starts, the whole thing becomes almost as if it was a living, real series of characters that are all animated before your eyes.
When it first ramps up, it's quite incredible. You get a lot of people scratching their heads.
You know, English Heritage have taken a great leap of faith, but now Belsay has a reputation, and it has a reputation of doing some really good, prestigious, ambitious and imaginative projects. It has now become, weirdly, a contemporary arts venue.